being safe?
Yeah, everybody's safe. Everybody is safe. Actually, my sister had a bit of COVID, but she came out safely.
Oh, well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness.
So we were, well, situation, I would say here, it is stabilizing from the past when you compare it to how it was a week ago. It is now I would say stabilizing. So we know it is stabilizing because people are able to get to find beds in hospitals.
But what I'm told is, James.
That's huge.
Sorry. What I'm told is, in the rural areas, the pandemic is very huge and it is really virulent, I believe.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And they are not coming to the urban areas for the hospitalization, and you don't find any rural health centers which can really accommodate patients,
Right.
Because what I am told is the oxygen levels of oxygen consumption is more in the mandal level now rather than the urban centers.
Okay. I would say mandal level would be like county at the county level. So I don't know whether the county should be a district or a mandal, but anyways, but it just you have an idea of what it is. And the other thing being, so one of my friends, he started calling all the pharmacies a couple of days ago. He kept calling them for 2 days straight. So we knew that, and they said that the rush at the pharmacies has lessened at almost 25-30%. So it's not as much rush as it was before, because we're not getting any particular numbers. No number. The government is just outright lying. And while they're saying that the death count in my city, we were told, is around 27. That was which came in the newspapers.
Official.
It's like 27, whereas the
27
crematorium,
people?
27 people per day. And what we have seen at the cremation grounds is there are two large cremation grounds. At one place there were 150, then another place were 200 bodies cremated.
That's per day.
That's per day. And whenever we visit a cremation ground, and someone's someone passes away, I remember seeing only one funeral pyre, and here you're talking about like 200 per day, and this happened for a whole month. And I'm not talking about the rest of the cremation places. I'm talking about the two largest ones, and that was the size of the death count. And officially, the government said that nationally there are about 300,000 dead nationally, but we think I think New York Times said that it is something like a 1 million, and
it said 40 million.
Yeah, and a worst case scenario is about 5 to 6 million. That's what the New York Times said. But from what we've gathered, I think the actual count would be like 5 to 6 million, and a conservative scale would be 5 to 6 million, and the worst case, we don't know. It would be around 10 million. That is what happened, and yeah, it's not being reported. So, shall we start our topic, sir?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah. So now we're talking, as we discussed earlier, about collective security, and so here in this context, collective security entails the security issues of all the nation states put together. So here the collectivization, we're talking of collectivization in the terms of nation states. And so I thought that we should just quickly dwell into the emergence of nation states before we get into our main topic, because we're talking about nation states throughout. So the history of nation states. And so where do we start? So where else but the Treaty of Westphalia? Actually, I and Mr. Ramu had a phone discussion on this a couple of days ago. It was just, I gave him only a brief of this. But I thought we'll have a quick rejoinder of how the nation state emerged, and and we'll take on from there. We'll have a quick 5-minute a blast of the take a blast from the past, and then we'll have a foundation to start our discussion. So Treaty of Westphalia, 1654. 1654, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah.
1640s. I think it was.
No, 1648. I'm sorry, 1648.
48. Yeah.
Yeah, 1648. So the Treaty of Westphalia, you want to go into it quickly, or should I start and then you will take it from me?
I can keep it pretty brief. Yeah. So the Peace of Westphalia, or the Treaty of Westphalia, was signed in Germany after the 30 Years' War and 80 Years' War, towards the end of the Holy Roman Empire. And it was basically setting up the nation state, modern nation state as we know it.
What is a 30-year-old war?
Religious, I believe.
Yeah, it is between Protestants and Catholics.
That's the funny thing. I mean,
Yeah.
the Europeans love to say it's a religious war, but really all wars are economic in nature.
Exactly.
All of them.
Exactly.
So again, a lot of these things are incited by
I think
empires like Rome trying to maintain their
okay.
control. Like the
What happened, James?
No. I thought you were not there. I did not put on gallery, so I thought I was missing you. Yeah.
No, we are 3 of us only there. No, this gallery
Right.
is better.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think some of the most important things to note about the Treaty of Westphalia is that it's the first time that Europeans are recognizing that a government led by one person or by several wealthy people are in fact a great liability. The transfer of power was never stabilized. The security of where people lived was very much threatened all of the time by kings that wanted to wage war, and just for greed, for Rome, for whatever reason. So the key takeaway of Westphalia is that this is the first time that in Europe people came together and decided that it was in their national security interest to set up the nation state, which would have administration. And at the time, it of course was still the aristocracy and the controlling powers of whoever the king's advisors had been, or wealthy landowners. So even though they're saying that they're creating the nation state, there is still a heavy element of feudalism happening. And we can really see that in the next 400 years since that treaty was made. I think that even today, we have elements of the aristocracy and that authoritarian control, which is still presenting a problem here. And ultimately, when the Treaty of Westphalia was made, there were inherent contradictions. So there's a lot of research coming out about Machiavelli, for example, Niccolo Machiavelli.
Laura, we lost you. Laura, your screen froze.
Republic. Sorry.
Laura, okay, we lost you at Machiavelli.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, your screen froze for a couple of seconds.
Sorry, the internet here isn't the best. Machiavelli is getting a lot more attention in political science debates, especially in America, because he was the one that really set up the idea of what is now considered a constitutional democracy. Only when Westphalia took his ideas and those of some other thinkers and put them together, they excluded some of the key subjects of what Machiavelli was talking about when he thought of a constitutional republic or a constitutional democracy. And in Machiavelli's mind, the best system of government would be one that had representation of all ethnicities and socioeconomic classes and genders. That was a key principle of what he thought would make the most stable government. When Westphalia was formed, it again was not well represented by European governments. It was primarily the aristocracy, the wealthy landowner owners, the feudal owners of the King Society that turned into the modern nation state.
And I just want to interject quickly also, because a lot of the royalty, the kings, the princes in Europe at that time, and there were plenty of them, couple of hundred of them. And it's not like the 35, 40 states which make up the European Union now. It was like there were almost several hundred, 400 or 500 states in Europe, and all of them resented the authority of Rome and Pope. And so when it was at the same time, the issues of Protestantism, the theology of Protestantism came about, and they saw that supporting this new theology would enable them to break away from the Pope and the Church. And because he had, a kind of a supranational authority over all the states, because he had to legitimize the crown. So that they deeply resented that overarching authority of the Pope. And so they supported Martin Luther against the Pope. And so one of the things which was decided at the Treaty of Westphalia. Westphalia is a town in Germany. So one of the things that was decided at this treaty was that no nation state would interfere in the religious affairs of another nation state. Which means, because if one nation state took the religion of Protestantism, a Catholic state shouldn't attack it because they are following Protestant religion. And so the concept of non-interference in each other's states, a nation, still continues to this day, and still in a lot of international treaties and all that. The concept of non-interference still, after 400 years, is still brought up in the United Nations all the time. So this concept emerged from that point. And in one way, so that separated total that so that in a way there was total separation of the state from the church kind of happened from that point. So over to you, Laura.
Yes, and it's very important to note that one of the effects in modernity is also that in the United Nations, nation states preserve their autonomy over their internal affairs whenever there is a conflict in international law. So as much as we want to have collective security and the United Nations empowered to prevent certain catastrophes, the nation states are not willing to hand over the power to the UN in terms of legislature and that kind of control.
Really?
Another important fact to note is that the nation states being built in Westphalia are entirely focused on national security. So this concept of a nation state automatically pits certain cultures against other cultures. It thrives on the idea of kind of dichotomy thinking. We have to have an enemy against the state to preserve the image and the legitimacy
Yes.
of the state.
Oh,
You need to have
So-
an enemy. For the concept
Yes.
of nation state to survive, you need to have an enemy. That is the crux of the entire thing.
I mean, as we know, most states, as we consider them now, were so culturally and religiously diverse
Right.
that the only way to pull people from so many different backgrounds together in the ideas of the modern nation state was to pit them all against a common enemy. So the entire system is fueled by conflict.
Yes. Right. And
so without an enemy, there's no nation state.
right, but then
Yes.
why you don't need to have a border then.
Yeah, naturally, right. Very true.
Right.
Very true.
You
Very
don't
true.
need to have a border. And I'm not sure of which scholar said this, but how a definition, how a nation state is defined is a nation state is when you have people with common culture, common history, common heritage, and a specific language living within specified geographical borders. That entails a nation state. And basically, it says that it is a homogeneous group. And this homogeneous group has been homogeneous since, thousands of years. That they are distinct people, very homogeneous, and so they have nothing to do with the other groups. So they also, the principle of self-determinism kind of applies. They apply the principle of self-determinism to them so strongly that, and which is also one of the key factors in the emergence of nation states, because at some point, empires, when they were crumbling, they thought people should have their own governments, not have a larger supra-state empire thing over them.
All right.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
Sorry. I need to switch to the phone because the internet is too unstable.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Are you outside somewhere, or where are you now? Because we still have you. We have two Lauras here. On the
I'm in the
laptop.
hotel and I just shut down the one on the laptop so that my phone can use the cellular connection as well.
All right. Yeah. But we still see you. We still see you here.
Okay, good.
Still, we still see two of you here.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's gone. Now you're back to one.
Okay. So James, I'm actually going to fast forward to World War I.
Right.
Because I think that one of the first time, which was of course very jarring for the world, is the failure of the nation state in World War I. And there were kind of layers of what was going on there. A nation state such as the British were able to pit ethnic minorities in empires against the empire.
Right.
So for the example of the Ottoman Empire, they had maintained diversity within their empire for a few hundred years. They had actually invited in Jewish people and ethnic minorities because they felt that Turkish people culturally were too focused on military endeavors, and they wanted to enhance business and commerce and education. So at the time, when at its inception, the Ottoman Empire wasn't necessarily a convert to Islam or be killed type scenario. It was submit to the Ottoman Empire and become part of the empire. Many of the main generals or business leaders in the Ottoman Empire were from ethnic minorities in Central Asia, all the way to Eastern Europe. On the verge of World War I, the British had decided that after years and years of conflict with Russia, they wanted more interest in the Middle East. And Russia and Turkey had been fighting the Crimea War, and the British had essentially approached the Ottoman Empire and told them, if you don't side with us and join forces with Russia against Germany, then we can't do business. And then they incited all kinds of religious minorities against the Ottoman Empire, such as the Armenians, the Kurds. The British had really empowered people from all over the Ottoman Empire to start attacking outposts of the empire and killing whoever they thought was ethnically Turkish. It was extremely hard to tell on the verge of World War I who was who. One of the main reports of the US government fighting in World War I is that the US soldiers would come back from the front and they would literally have a day of almost no fighting on the European front because they had, the Westphalians on the other side of the line, which was, of course, the Holy Roman Empire remnants and German forces, but they weren't really German forces. They were Central European or Germanic forces.
Yes.
Very oftentimes, those soldiers on the Axis would come over to the Allied troops and say, you've got to watch out for the Prussians, kill those bastards, we hate them, whatever, yada, yada. So it was very muddled who was fighting who, and even then within the empires, the emerging nation states had kind of pitted all of these ethnic groups within empires against each other. So the idea of common enemy or collective security or national security was becoming increasingly more important, but there are, of course, loopholes. It's a very bad system when we're trying to set up trade, when we're trying to deal with climate change, environmental challenges, or pandemics. Go ahead, James, take it from there.
Right, yeah. And the concept of, and then I would like to jump to World War II now.
Okay, definitely.
Right, yeah. because then the whatever collective security, the thing which came about during the interceding years from 1920 to the late 1930s, it collapsed. Everything collapsed, which culminated into the Second World War, and so they thought it was very important to re-strategize the concept of collective security again. And so United Nations came about, because until that point, even though what was that? Woodrow Wilson in World War I, was it Alliance of Nations or, sorry?
League of Nations.
League of Nations.
League
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Nations,
yeah, League
yes.
of Nations. So, which never took off. So they really thought that, okay, we need to have a collective security arrangement. And so basically, as Dr. Oleg Kopsev would always used to emphasize, United Nations is not like the benevolent organization which we see right now, but it was a military organization. So that would have common force which would enforce security across global regions where there was conflict. And so this was how the concept of collective security strengthened after World War II, and especially because of the nuclear issues. Now, Laura, I would like to jump into one of the articles you sent, which is a very good article. Do you have some more notes, or should I go into that?
I think my major note was that, I mean, of course, we know that World War II was caused by World War I. And Germany was forced to pay very heavy reparations. Countries were banding together in Axis versus Allies, and not necessarily in World War I because either one was wrong or better or worse than the other. But there really were concerted efforts from certain political leaders to undermine the authority of other nation states. And then when we basically, the post-World War I era made Germany so unstable that at first they resisted a fascist like Hitler, but then the society became so vulnerable because it was impoverished. People had no education, they had no healthcare, they didn't have food security, all kinds of other issues that the UN now works in today are being recognized as important for collective and national security. So when we talk about what World War II did, it made the UN more focused on boosting education, healthcare, helping people out of poverty. And although there is a military aspect, they start to finally incorporate other aspects that make a society more secure. And let's see, what else? I think that was the main one. The rest of my notes were basically about how the National Security Advisor under Obama was commenting on things like that. And we have some changes to national security and also collective security where we didn't necessarily have to worry about them before, such as the media. We know from World War II that media was a huge proponent of villainizing the other side of the people you were fighting. But now it's only gotten worse, and we see kind of those divides of pitting people within a country against certain groups of other people because of media influence. So go ahead, James. Those were my main points, is that collective security isn't just military.
Yeah,
It's
right,
also
right.
focused on
Yeah, because
social
until that point, it was, post World War II, it was seen a lot in terms of collective security, but now we have all these aspects. And even then, national security, even now, is still seen in terms of military security. Most they give more preference to that. And now that we have a pandemic situation and all that, and again, so we're really looking at issues of collective security again. And this, again, as you said earlier, has a conflict with the nation state system. And
Yes.
yeah, so you sent a really good article. I just want to pull it up now.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So can you
Yeah. I'll do
share
that.
my screen, sir?
I'll do that.
Which one was it?
It's the thing on Center for International Governance Innovation.
Yeah, you can share, James.
Yes, sir.
There we go.
So can you see the screen yet?
Yeah, we can.
But I'm not able to see it at my end. Okay, yeah. You're seeing the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Right. One second.
Yeah, this article really had a comment that stuck out to me when they talk about security. It's called the Five Eyes Alliance.
You're right.
And they are, of course, what they call the Anglosphere.
Right, exactly.
Which
Exactly.
I'm not sure how any state can talk about national security when they're so willing to exclude so many other voices.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I'm just starting. I'm reading the thing.
Yeah, good.
And just please interrupt me and comment or interject whenever you want to. So, so this series of essays is built on a simple but foundational assumption: governments that know better do better, provided the political will exists. Early warning was vital to meet an unprecedented global pandemic as COVID-19 emerged in China and began its lethal spread. But there are many signs that traditional warning mechanisms did not function as expected in this situation. Media reports indicate that the Canadian Global Public Health Intelligence Network, a critical early warning system run by the Public Health Agency of Canada, meant to serve an international clientele, including the World Health Organization, effectively went dark in May 2019, 7 months before a pandemic alert system would be needed most. International understanding of the potential severity of the pandemic was further hampered by early problems in reporting on the outbreak from China. According to a report from the US Department of Homeland Security, the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January, while it stockpiled medical supplies by both increasing imports and decreasing exports. The WHO, the International Systems Portal for Disease Outbreak Intelligence, was reliant on China's cooperation and was inhibited in its own efforts to provide accurate information. Evaluating how, right.
Can I stick in one quick comment there?
Sure. Correct.
The date here is very interesting. In 2019, let's also remember that coronaviruses were being researched in about 2012. They were identified very early on, after about 2010, as being one of the diseases that could pose the greatest pandemic threat. All national governments were told to stockpile the proper medical supplies. They could have started working on a vaccine. In Wuhan specifically, coronaviruses were killing maybe 600 or 700 people since about 2012, 2013.
Wow.
The main difference is that the Obama administration funded a pandemic team that was working through the World Health Organization, and they were sending the best epidemiologists from all over the world to research this and share that information with international governments. Trump, when he came to power in, 2016, the first thing that he did was annihilate all funding for the United States pandemic team and funding for the World Health Organization's pandemic crisis alert team, or whatever they had coordinating with them. So we have to really kind of reevaluate how much we really want to blame China right now, but it's not entirely China's fault, because the largest funder of epidemiological research decided to take away all of the funding.
Right. And Obama was sending all these research experts to Wuhan.
Yes.
Yes, they were sending. That's what I heard of. Okay.
There was actually there's a book called The Next Pandemic by Ali Khan. He was a Brooklyn raised epidemiologist, and he's been on Ebola, dengue, all kinds of epidemics. But when he went and saw coronavirus firsthand in Wuhan, he immediately called his wife and said, "This is the one that's going pandemic. Get the house ready, stockpile at least 3 to 4 months of different things." And that's when they first started raising the alarm, just because it was far more contagious than things like Ebola.
Okay. I didn't know this.
So the knowledge was there. Technically speaking, all national governments are supposed to have contingency plans. Large corporations are also supposed to have contingency plans about things like this. I mean, one of my friends in the military said it best. She's like, there is a manual for all of this.
Exactly. There is.
We've had a manual since 2012 about what to do in a pandemic of a respiratory illness. And the thing is, we didn't do any of it. Nobody did.
Yeah, they had a manual on how to go about it, and a strategy on how to go about it.
Many.
Yeah, France did, UK did, everyone did. And when the French health minister, I'm not remembering her name, I think when she stockpiled on stuff in, maybe in 2016 or something, because they were anticipating this, the media went after her so badly, and they had, cartoon after cartoon of her, how she's been pandering to the corporates because she's just giving them money to buy stuff which people don't need. And ultimately they drove her out of office. She had to resign. And so that's how this was all, while they were prepared, they were not, willing to act on it, or didn't have the proper leadership in place.
Absolutely, which makes the statement very ironic, doesn't it? The Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19.
Right, because they knew that they knew what the Chinese are going to do. They knew that the thing is going to come out of China. Everybody knows that the coronaviruses are going to come out of China, and they know how China is going to behave as a state. How the Chinese state is going to behave, and all that. They have, top researchers talking about the behavior of the Chinese state and everything, and they've prepared. They've been preparing for it. And
they're trying to hit a dog for acting like a dog. We know what they were going to do.
So that was the thing. So I'm going to continue.
Okay.
Evaluating how you want to say something else, Laura?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Evaluating how crucial global health intelligence should be generated, assessed, reported to policymakers in a timely way, and shared will be one of the key lessons from this experience for countries around the world, right? Another key and congruent lesson to be learned from COVID-19 is the urgent need to reconceptualize doctrines of national security. A national security strategy is ultimately a framework for knowing better, all right? So, because most of the national security issues is again, when they all sit in the Oval Office or in the Pentagon, it's all again mostly military stuff. And even though we have all the other disciplines they're working on too, but it's again, it's like that. With COVID-19, we have seen cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns launched by adversarial state actors. The domestic deployment of the Canadian and Australian militaries among the national forces to protect vulnerable populations. The disruption and vulnerability of just-in-time global supply chains, worrying domestic political tensions and fractures in many states, and an erosion of international cooperation. So here they're saying there were disinformation campaigns launched by adversarial state actors. This at this point, I think this became very huge. I think even though this has always been there of disinformation campaigns, but state actors directly indulging in this, as I think has been a feature since Hillary's election. Laura?
Since whose election?
Hillary Clinton's election?
Oh, it's been a problem for even longer than that. But
yeah, but like the way I think way because they were always behind some organization, but Russia was blatant in how it was open and blatant on how they.
Very much like the situation in World War I. I'm really disappointed that no think tanks are talking about. We know misinformation is a big problem. We know the world is increasingly more connected, but nobody talks about why are people vulnerable to believing this.
Exactly.
And I think that our kind of walls of protection for the population from believing misinformation or conspiracy theory outright was, again, education, healthcare, their day-to-day quality of life. And if people don't have that education and they can't provide for their families, then they become very vulnerable to this political extremism.
So I'm continuing. All of this is taking place amid ongoing tectonic geopolitical shifts, bookended by climate change and an overdue discussion about data tracking, commercial surveillance, and the attention economy. A notable feature of existing national security doctrine is the willingness to identify pandemics as a national security threat without building a sufficient response capability and while largely decoupling this threat from a traditional understanding of the role and functions of security and intelligence systems. All right. You want to clear that for me, please?
Absolutely. I mean, I worked in military intelligence. Our job is to analyze every threat to our country and strengthen our allies in order to preserve our own national security. And ultimately, on every single issue, we would hit a wall. In the US, it was that the corporations would buy out the political leaders who would then contradict whatever they were being told by top military officials. So we've known that we've had problems with China for a long time, and yet people are making so much money about it in the US that they don't care. They don't care what it means for national security. We've known for a long time that we probably shouldn't have an embargo against Iran, or that embargoes are not working.
Yes.
Iran is not technically a military threat.
Yeah.
I mean,
like everybody knows that, but then it's like it completely occupies all media channels.
exactly. But I mean, it's interesting because here in New Orleans was the center of a Caribbean economy and a Caribbean sphere of influence where France and Spain were, and with West Africans, were the most powerful people. They had their own way of doing things. They didn't need mainland America. The vulnerability was that their trade routes were reliant on the waterways. And that was the first thing that the British Anglo-Saxon type governments attacked. They seized control of it, and they've been attacking it ever since colonization of Louisiana. So when the 1950s embargo against Cuba hit, it decimated the economy of the South, which was much more reliant on trade with Haiti and Cuba and the Caribbean countries versus trade with other parts of the United States. So we're not acknowledging critical pieces of national security because certain people want to make control or maintain their control and make all of the money off of doing what they want to do.
Oh.
So again, our national security is based on exclusion just as much as our economic system is.
Right. And then the article continues in saying, in our view, this needs to change, and change needs to be driven by exchanges among like-minded states and ultimately by public debate. Exactly what you just said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sir, have you heard about the Five Eyes Treaty?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is probably one of the very important intelligence sharing platform or treaty. And so he talks about this alliance. One important forum for discussions of a new approach to national security is the Five Eyes Alliance, comprising Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So do you see something here? Sorry?
I'm wondering when this was published, because this is definitely not new. In military classification and NATO projects, everything is classified first for Five Eyes. And it may actually exclude other countries in NATO because they don't want to incorporate them. And it's also undermining our need for important relationships with India, with Turkey, with other actors who have strong regional influence and are kind of desperate to be at the table. But this idea of the Anglosphere, it's the same thing of Anglo-Saxon culture telling everyone else what to do.
Yeah. So basically, it's like, it's a Anglo-Saxon thing, the Five Eyes.
I don't know where we get all this arrogance.
Yeah. But they're like, you're quite blatant about it. Sorry, but
It's true. It's, this attitude is really creating more threats to national security.
indeed.
Like
indeed.
we talked about last time, about if the nation state can't protect the people that live in it, which are very diverse, and it only protects the people that they want to endorse, this puts the legitimacy and power of the state in a very dangerous situation.
Indeed.
I mean, the police don't have a lot of respect. And again, that's something that is fueling the conspiracy theory, but also fueling protests and violence and different things, especially in America, or driving people towards extremism because they're not being represented and they're not being heard.
Mhm.
Same is the situation in India too now.
Yeah. And of course, India has so much more diversity
Yeah,
than the
absolutely.
United States. I mean,
Absolutely.
what does this really mean for your government? I mean,
Exactly.
do they make any efforts to bring in marginalized voices? How do they approach that situation?
Mhm. Right.
Is it all up to the local governments?
Oh, well, I think Ramu should answer that.
No. See, the thing is, about 14% of the population in India are Muslims now. You cannot ignore their presence in India. But the present dispensation, the government here, I don't know what they are thinking, what their line of thinking is, but they are simply just ignoring their presence. And they are with this new acts like the CAA and the, what is that? The other one is called
NRC,
NRC, National
National
Citizenship
Register,
of
National
Citizens.
Registry for Citizens.
Citizens.
And so what is the acronym for CAA, sir?
Citizens Amendment Act.
Citizens Amendment Act. Right.
So with that, actually, when we think about the national movement, when the Ottoman Empire was dismantled or abolished, the Congress here and M.K. Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, they have supported the Khilafat movement here.
They supported the Caliphate.
Yeah, Caliphate. And they have, they have in fact raised a movement here against the abolition of Caliphate. Abolition of Caliphate. So it is not new in India that these Muslims were treated as a second citizens. And in fact, when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister here, she supported the Palestine movement in toto.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't Gandhi himself very opposed to Israel and the Jews?
Oh, no.
No,
he was.
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't. That was Gandhi is a person you cannot say that he opposed any person or a community. He was. You cannot say that he opposed any civilization, country, community, faith, religion, or things like that. he was because he was, when you study Gandhi, which I have started recently, understanding Gandhi very recently. It's more about his ideas more or less form like a very distinctive religion in itself.
Why did he?
Sorry?
He's on record in the U.S. as I'm not sure if it's true, as saying that basically Jewish people should hand their lives to Hitler.
Well, that's what
And
he
I'm
said.
not sure.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was in the context of better to be the victim than the aggressor, or
See, that's the thing. That's what I was trying to say, is that when he was also questioned, I'm not sure about this because I read this quite some time ago, when he was also questioned about what he would do when if Hitler invades India and all that. And he said he would try to go and talk to him and dissuade him, then also talk to him that he should refrain, give up violence, and he said, okay, what are you going to do if they try to kill you? And he said, I'll give up my life. And that's what his issue was, non-violence. He said, you should go and get yourself killed with the aggressor. That's his whole point. But when you look at it in bits and pieces, and when you localize the entirety of what he said, and look at it at bits and pieces, so it looks like, or when you how do you say? I'm not getting the right word. Put it in the context of a particular community. So it looks like he was opposed to them. But the thing is, he was not much exposed to, I would say, the Jewish community, because he lived in England, then he lived in South Africa for a while. Maybe his exposure was not so much as he was exposed to, I would say, Christian or Muslim religions.
okay.
Probably.
And I think
Yes.
if we zoom out a little bit, the nonviolent strategy is definitely more applicable in anything that's commerce based, because of course they need the labor force to do the work. But
Yeah.
when it comes to blind racial hate and genocide and literally trying to annihilate every last type of person in that group, it becomes a little bit more complex.
Indeed.
If the whole group just decides to die, then the aggressor has won.
Right. I think I would say it is, Gandhi is quite complicated to understand, and even now, I used to have a lot of misapprehensions about him myself, and so you need to understand things also. From most of it was, he was trying to get independence for the country. He was trying to get united country. He was trying to unite the country into a national movement. He united the country. India was a collection of states, and he united all those into a single entity and all that. And so basically all of it, and he didn't have the force to take on the British Empire, and all he had were people, a lot of people who he needed the masses behind him, and the masses were poor, even though there were groups of rich individuals in the country, but it was a very small group. But he needed the mass support of the masses, and so he directed all that mass support into opposing the British Empire, and he could not do it with no force. And all he had to do was put your body in the way. That's what he did. and he put
Gotcha.
everyone's bodies.
In fact, the national movement, British aggression is in 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny. It took 90 years for them to go away, but the national movement is 1917 to 1947. That is when Gandhi was in the picture. Otherwise, they were always very happy ruling India. They were happy plundering the natural resources here. And here you should read one book by Shashi Tharoor, James. We should get that book. He actually has written a wonderful book. I was actually participating in one of the reviews.
Okay.
We should get that book.
Can you write down the name for me?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll do that.
So we'll
Yeah.
go again. I think we need to have a separate session on Gandhi.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah, definitely.
We need to add some Gandhians who can really educate us and Laura too.
Right.
Oh, please.
And so let's as we went off topic for a bit. So
Yeah, no issues. Yeah, please go ahead. James,
Yeah,
go ahead.
come to the concluding part of the article here. A survey of okay, yeah, right here. The Five Eyes partnership has over the past decade expanded its scope beyond intelligence sharing to incorporate dialogue on key geopolitical and economic concerns. While it is a small and tight club of
Sir,
Anglosphere
I'm in a
states-
meeting. Can I call you in a bit, sir? Hello? Yeah, I'm in a meeting, sir. Can I call in a bit? Yeah.
While it is a small and tight club of Anglosphere states, it could serve as an important sounding board. A survey of pre-COVID-19 national security doctrine among the Five Eyes provides a sense of how its individual members may need to pivot to face the future. Among the Five Eyes, New Zealand is unique in it has no current national security strategy or any recent precedent for creating one. But as Joe Burton argues in his essay for this series, COVID-19 presents an opportunity for a deeper rethink about what we mean by security in the New Zealand context. He calls for a new approach that would put emphasis on human security, a doctrine of economic resilience, and an all hazards risk framework. Australia shares a history with Canada of paying only episodic attention to national security strategies. Okay, I think I'll leave that. Okay. The key risks identified in the Australian national security strategy would certainly need a rethink. The 6 core risks range from espionage and foreign interference to malicious cybersecurity and state-based conflict or coercion, significantly affecting Australia's interests. The China threat subtext was implicit. None of these risks have gone away, and many have increased in amplitude since 2013. But the Australian strategy made almost no mention of pandemic threats or climate change security impacts. That's the entire crux of the thing. They're totally more focused on military issues all the time. As Patrick Walsh argues, a first point for COVID-19 policy framework is for the government and national security intelligence enterprise to move beyond the rhetoric of pandemics being a national security issue to operationalizing these words in a political and bureaucratic sense. He has specific recommendations in this regard, but also notes that the cultural issues involved for the Australian intelligence and security system is in moving pandemic threats into national security space. So they have, it's not just Australia. I think this is an issue with, again, lot of these states. Laura?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Walsh is, go ahead.
Again, I want somebody to raise the question, what is the insulation against these security threats? what
Okay.
prevents the population from becoming vulnerable to all of these different things? So it's less and less about our military, and it's also a lot more about, what is a country doing day to day for the life of its citizens? Because ultimately those are going to be the things that protect it from also biological security, but the environmental security and the susceptibility to misinformation or propaganda.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. I think they're talking about it here in the next paragraph. Among the two leading powers in the Five Eyes Alliance, the United Kingdom and the United States, the problem of dated national security strategies and siloed approaches to public health and national security looks, at least on paper, less pervasive. Yeah. Both countries have produced a series of national security strategies, and both have recent pre-COVID-19 biological security strategies, as you said. The question then becomes, do these two countries serve as models for the rest of the Five Eyes partnership in the doctrinal approaches to national security and health security strategy? The United Kingdom produced its first national security strategy in March 2008. It set out a new understanding of national security for the United Kingdom, explained in this way. In the past, the state was the traditional focus of foreign, defense, and security policies, and national security was understood as dealing with the protection of the state and its vital interests from attacks by other states. Over recent decades, our view of national security has broadened to include threats to individual citizens and to our way of life, as well as to the integrity and interests of the state. That is why this strategy deals with transactional crime, pandemics, and floodings.
Wow.
Not part of the traditional idea of national security, but clearly challenges that can affect large numbers of our citizens, which demand some of the same responses as more traditional security threats, including terrorism. This was a bold statement. So they're changing, which means that they are looking at more issues of collective security, and again, to what extent they would want to, and with whom they would want to do it with. In the case of UK, they just had a huge Brexit and came out of the EU. So what do you say about this statement and Brexit, Laura? They contradict each other so much.
They do, and I'm still kind of hung up on the word integrity of the state. I think that's an interesting choice of words. I think that collectively people are really having to identify who they are, and it's very uncomfortable for them to confront their own national history, but also their part in national comfort. For example, certain people are entitled to more benefits of the state than others.
Exactly.
And yeah.
Right. This was a bold statement. It elevated the understanding of the threats posed by pandemics and climate change impacts to a high level, and just as important, argued that the approach to these non-traditional security threats contained many elements similar to those deployed against more traditional concerns, including terrorism. These elements included monitoring, intelligence collection, and risk assessment, the development of response capabilities, and the inclusion of the inculcation of societal resilience.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, what you just said. Subsequent iterations of the British national security strategy suggest the bold new outlook never fully took hold. Right. Surprise. The most recent update to the British National Security Strategy was produced in 2018. Pandemics were included in a general category of national security threats labeled diseases and national hazards affecting the UK. Discussion of specific responses to pandemic threats was offloaded to a separate biosecurity review produced in July 2018. The UK Biological Security Strategy extolled the capabilities and systems available within the United Kingdom while calling for greater integration of effort, sustained attention to the threat, and support for developing countries to help improve their capabilities. Exactly. Okay, I'll get back to that later. Disease outbreaks were identified as a major globalized threat to society, while accidental release of a virus or deliberate biological attacks were seen as less likely, high impact, but low probability. The UK strategy maintained a traditional distinction between the role of intelligence services in collecting information regarding deliberate threats, largely from malicious state actors, and the conduct of epidemiological intelligence by civilian public health authorities and experts in Britain and through international partnerships. The key role played by the WHO's Health Emergencies Program was acknowledged alongside Britain's financial contribution to it. The WHO was described as having a world-leading surveillance and information network filtering 5,000 disease signals a month, looking for outbreaks of pandemic potential. So it's still, they're basically saying that they're still not fully divested in it. Is that?
Yeah. And I'm a little bit skeptical because the British response to the pandemic has been very severe, and they are forcing people to pay to quarantine upon re-entry to their own country in government sanctioned hotels that are about £1,700 a week. And New Zealand had a much better outcome, but again, these are two small islands where geographic isolation is largely possible for them. We haven't really heard a voice of the success stories of countries that are geographically connected or very large and diverse and have a lot of movement of transport of people and goods. So I think, you know, I want to hear more about what China did to prevent it from going all throughout China. We kind of know the answer to that, but we really need to hear stories from other countries about how they achieved the outcome they wanted in preventing the spread of the pandemic without such a forceful or authoritarian strategy. Because yeah, it's nice to hear from England and New Zealand, and they had very different outcomes, but there are certain things in their favor, geopolitically speaking, that I don't think apply to a lot of other countries.
Okay, yeah, right. So that would be one of their. So automatically their security strategy would be rightfully different from I would say many other.
So I guess the point of the matter is we shouldn't just be looking at disease signals of the actual virus that has the potential for a pandemic. We need to be looking at the signals for national security as well, based on, you know, the movement, the size, the scope of whatever country it's trying to tailor the strategy towards. So there should be a framework where a country could evaluate, here's what we have going on, major highways, things like that. How do we effectively fight the pandemic in the best way that will work for us? So the framework needs to be expanded.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, right. So it is safe to say that key assumptions built into the 2018 UK biological security strategy, such as the distinction between state-sponsored biological threats and naturally occurring pandemics, and the singular reliance on the WHO for global surveillance, have been made generously obsolete by COVID-19.
Yeah.
It is dangerously, James.
Right, have been made dangerously obsolete.
Yes.
by COVID.
Yes.
The whole complexity, the situation is changed when you say generous.
Right. Yeah. So they're like, so these guys are like blinking now, looking at the boards, looking at their bold statement on national security. The creation of new Joint Biosecurity Center in May 2020 to act as an intelligence fusion and response mechanism is one early indicator of new thinking.
Yes.
A new national security strategy will have to address a complex threat environment and will have to shake itself loose from an overwhelming attention to terrorism. Still, it's like, I think the issue of terrorism, I think, is like this huge, elephant in the room, which again, as states use it as a form for their own legitimacy.
Yes.
Right.
And it also shows that there's a lot of, we need different fail safes in the government. How many countries have fallen susceptible to one party rule, or, personalities of cults of personalities during the pandemic? And instead of having the people being able to express their wishes of what they want to see their government do to protect them, we've basically transformed democracies into an abusive situation. People that wear masks in America right now are being abused. I don't know how many places I've been in New Orleans. They're like, well, if you've been vaccinated, you can go ahead and take off your mask. And it's like, international travel is still permitted here. There are people from all over the world. How do you know if they, this virus is mutating so quickly? It's very possible that the vaccine would not be effective at a strain that's coming into the country. So we need all governments to step away from this one party ruling system, which is essentially authoritarianism, and have some kind of fail safe where the collective voice of the people can say, well, if you want to maintain your political power, then you need to do this for us. And here's what we want to see in terms of protection for our own health and safety.
Right. Also, like, where have you seen in how many countries have you seen where the entire state apparatus was taken down by a terrorist group and taken over, and an entire country being taken over, except for Afghanistan? Where else in the world have you seen a terrorist group being so remarkably, productive and taking over a country? No, none. But enormous amounts of news media was focused on just single thing. I think it is the biggest bogeyman ever for a state to hit and then claim legitimacy for itself.
Absolutely.
So coming back, a new national security strategy will have to address a complex threat environment. It will have to shake itself loose from an overweening attention to terrorism, right? The United States is the lead power by far in the Five Eyes Alliance, with dominant military and intelligence capabilities and far-reaching global interests and power projection through weight. successive US administrations have taken the lead since the September 11 attacks in promulgating high-profile national security strategies. The process was begun by Bush in September 2002 with a strategy that set the United States on a course of global counterterrorism and expansive democracy promotion, which provided the underpinnings for its costly interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. I remember when who was your first Homeland Security under Bush? This was created under Bush, right? Homeland Security.
Yes, yes. After, in response to September 11th.
Right. And who do you remember the name of the guy first? Who was the first guy who I kind of remember his face, but I'm not remembering his name. Anyways, he would come every day.
Rumsfeld.
Not Donald Rumsfeld. He was
No.
Secretary of Defense.
Oh, okay.
It was he was the guy who led them in prayers every day.
Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Oh my goodness, I'm unable to remember his name, but I can see his face. Anyways,
Stephen Hadley?
no. It's a known name. You would immediately groan if you. Do you have your phone? Now, let me just quickly do it. But I think. Well, I'm taking this up because.
Well, again, it's not national security if you don't get the whole nation on board. So
Right.
this adding prayer and this and that is it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
Yes, very true.
And
Very true. Yeah.
if we want to promote democracy around the world, maybe we better get it right at home first.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm checking him on the internet if I can find your name. No, Homeland Security was there since 2003. Oh no, it was created in 2011. I mean, sorry, 2011.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the takeaways here are really that national and collective security can very much be a dialogue between citizens and a governance.
Mhm.
And we have the tools of technology in place to really open those dialogues. Of course, there's still room for the experts to take inputs from their citizen base and formulate that into a professional policy, and then once again share it and explain why they
Absolutely.
came.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's why they came to the conclusions that they did. Here's what they learned from their citizens, and vice versa. So
Wonderful. Yes.
nobody is really using this to the best advantage and to ultimate ensure national security or collective security, which are now basically intertangled.
The reason I brought him up was because he would come every day on television and say like, oh, that threat level is red or 5 or something like that. He would, I think they assign colors, and I don't know how they could assign a threat level. I have no idea. And every day they would come on national television and say like the threat level was red or blue, or he used to give.
That's all from intelligence gathering. So
Right.
if we hear a lot of chatter, and we're still analyzing what it means, they'll raise the threat level. But it can be influenced by anything. I mean, I was
Exactly.
on
Yeah.
a military base when Obama got on television and said, big thank you to SEAL Team 6 out of Dam Neck, Virginia for killing Osama bin Laden. Well, for 2 months after that, it took an hour and a half to get onto our base.
Okay.
Yeah, the book, name of the book, Laura, is An Era of Darkness,
Okay.
The British Empire in India by Shashi Tharoor.
Right, right. I was trying to get, I was wanting to get, I'll send you the link, Laura, to it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking, I wanted to get that book too. It was supposedly to be a very good read.
Right, well,
Thank you.
the way it was reviewed, it will be one of the best reads, James.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So the most recent US national security strategy dates from midway through the presidency of Donald Trump. Not surprisingly, Trump wanted to put a distinctive stamp on his own strategy and to distance himself from his predecessors. He did so with a forceful expression of an America First policy and what the strategy described as a philosophy of principled realism. The realism component acknowledges, sir, international relations has, you study international relations through a set of theories. And so here we're talking about realism theory. And in particular, they're saying Trump's thing was principled realism. The realism component acknowledges what the strategy calls the central role of power in international politics. The principle is very America First oriented, grounded in the knowledge that advancing principles spreads peace and prosperity around the globe. Within such a construct, pandemic threats got very short shrift. The half-page devoted to them mixed a discussion of naturally emerging threats and deliberate bioweapon attacks. So the entire pandemic thing in his security strategy was for half a page. Wow. The short discussion about detecting such threats talked about working with other countries, improving health services in developing countries, and locking down laboratories to prevent accidental or criminal releases. Perhaps not surprisingly, no mention is made on the role of international institutions as the WHO or multilateral bodies, including the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. In the year following the implementation of the Trump national security strategy, the US government also produced a national biodefense strategy, like the national security strategy, the biodefense paper, and the biodefense paper involved a deliberate rejection of previous approaches, especially the more globalist and public health oriented strategies produced by the Obama administration. So all he had to do was just follow the manual, and probably the world would have been different. All right.
Okay, so we talked about political theory in our last conversation, and we determined that neo-realism and neoliberalism are the two main kind of skeletons that we use to explain what's happening in our body, right? In terms of our government.
Right.
Principled realism is not a thing. Like,
yeah,
it is very, again, it's attached to that cult of personality. It's not actually a political theory.
Okay. All right. Okay, I was like, okay, I never heard of this.
I mean, this isolationistic attitude is realism. It's the idea that we can take care of ourselves better by ourselves than trying to get along with anybody else in the world. This is not new. This is not Trump specific. This is very much a political theory of realism, which we've hit the limits in the world today of what realist theory, neo or classical realism, can explain. And that is the idea of national security. The state has to protect against the outside enemies, whether they be a disease or a belligerent government. And that is the purpose and identification of which nation state legitimacy rests. So we already identified that there are liabilities in this way of looking at the world, and there are things that need to be adapted.
Of course.
So making up another type of realism theory is not going to work.
Yes, exactly. So I was like, okay, where did I hear of this? And I was not able to make a connection to everywhere. Now, thank you for clearing that for me.
I mean, anyone with a political science background in America is like sitting here shaking their head at the television going, sorry, Donald, that's not a thing.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah,
And I'm sure you guys feel the same way about Modi.
Yeah.
Well, I we don't know who is the original, Modi or Trump. So it's like they kind of outdo each other, and they're serious contenders for.
Oh gosh, I mean, do the advisors to Modi shake their heads too? Because you all saw it, like Dr. Fauci shaking his head or rolling his eyes. He didn't even know what to do with.
If he had any.
Does he have advisors, or it's just Modi against the world?
No, he doesn't have any advisor.
That's right.
Oh geez.
No, had he had any advisors, the situation would have not been so bad, Laura.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
He really doesn't have anybody. We're not joking. We know what's
Who are all the
happening.
people supporting him?
Oh, well, that is the question. That is the question.
Oh, it really creates an awkward situation in a state. Like we're at first, Americans were like, okay, if you don't want to wear a mask and you want to die, then good, go die. We don't need you. It's one less person to vote for Trump. But with biological threats, there's just no way to insulate, and there's no way to protect anybody.
How can you do that? It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's just.
I mean, every government, every king, every empire has failed at preventing pandemics. We had them in Rome. We had them all the way through the Silk Roads in medieval Europe. I mean, what have we learned?
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'm going to continue.
Okay.
The US biodefense strategy, like its British counterpart, invoked good principles of readiness and leadership against globalized threats. Unfortunately, much of its guidance on the key role to be played by the federal government domestically and internationally in the event of a disease outbreak was not followed in practice when COVID-19 began its devastating attack on the US homeland, right, which we discussed. The very first goal defined in the US biodefense strategy was risk awareness. Unlike the British approach, which suggested a limited function for intelligence focused on information about deliberate or state-sponsored biological threats. The US conception called for a strong role for intelligence in strategic understanding across the range of biological threats, combining efforts at timely reporting and analysis, strategic warning, research, periodic risk assessment, forecasting, and informed planning scenarios. What the fuck? Oh, I mean, and still, oh my goodness, it was right. All right. The early warning mission was especially clear and ambitiously framed, provide strategic warning for and assess the potential impacts of diseases with potential to affect US national security or interests abroad, including assessments of the potential cascading effects, example, economic, societal, and governmental impact. You had like everything in place. I mean, you had all the cutlery on the table and you didn't like use it.
Correct.
And we're still eating with
Oh my
our
goodness.
hands.
Oh, well, I mean, at least half of your population is vaccinated after Biden got in power.
Anyway, if we're talking about the government's approach to biological threats, the main approach for Five Eyes is entirely against bioterrorism. And bioterrorism is as risky as nuclear collective security. It's much harder to control even than a nuclear weapon. So most governments are banking on the fact that it depends on the type of biological threat, right? They don't want to release anthrax. They do very specifically and in targeted ways. That's what bioterrorism really means in the US. It's primarily focused on anthrax. So, for example, that's something that the military is automatically all vaccinated against. Because there were specific targeted attacks of anthrax against US government and military officials. But when we're talking about a pandemic, we have to drop the idea of intent, because that's borderline conspiracy theory. There's just no government in the world that would realistically try to control a respiratory illness. They're way too unpredictable. So looking at it this way, and as you know, clearly somebody was out to get us and they released COVID. I mean, that again, that's conspiracy theory. There's nothing to suggest that these things just don't pop up organically in nature.
Exactly. It's just like,
So,
you know, people just want to believe so much otherwise, and it's like, you know, and they just want to feed it to the public, and it's easy for them to, you know.
I mean,
okay, you screwed up, but those are the guys who released it, and you know.
And again, this is the confines of realism theory in political science, that the idea that somebody is out to get you. So your best line of defense is to fight, isolate yourself, or do whatever you need to do to reinstate the legitimacy of the nation state. But that's not true. I mean, in reality, when it comes to a threat that we're all facing, we need a new political theory paradigm.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly, you're so right. I think you're the first person I've heard saying this, Laura.
That's what we have been talking, James. Do you remember?
Yes. Right.
I mean, my
right, sir. Exactly. Yes, sir. Yeah, we have been on it for a while. Yes.
You guys, are you going to write a book from India?
We need to. I mean, we haven't started ours yet.
Okay, no. I'm almost ready to begin.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
So, across the Five Eyes, the intelligence enterprise of the United States is often seen as a class apart, given its size, resources, and global reach. Other Five Eyes partners, in looking at the distinctive US approach to biosecurity, will have to decide whether the strategic warning role accorded to the US intelligence system is merely a byproduct of the enterprise scale or a function of need and advantage when it comes to addressing the national security threats posed by disease outbreaks. A fair reading of the US biosecurity strategy will also have to focus on its principles and set aside its shambolic implementation.
Oh my God.
Right.
Oh my.
That is severe. Where does Canada fit in to this survey? Five Eyes, National Security Strategies and Biosecurity Approaches. The answer is on the margins. Canada has never produced an overarching biosecurity strategy, unlike Britain and the United States. Its one attempt at a national security strategy was produced 16 years ago and has been forgotten. The 2004 Securing an Open Society, Canada's national security policy, deserved a better fate. It might have served as a useful construct if it had been sustained and adapted to a changing national security environment. Its emphasis on an all hazards understanding of national security threats, its identification of intelligence as the country's first line of defense against all manner of threats, its attention. I think we can just skip that, the Canada part. It's not much there. The challenge to reforming national security strategy and the aftermath of COVID-19 should not be underestimated. Coming up with a meaningful and evergreen strategy will be difficult and will face bureaucratic resistance. Right, this is the thing. And a possible absence of political champions, given that the practice has not been embedded in Canadian political culture. But we're still at Canada, which we can still skip. Okay, I'm just coming to the last paragraph. But if the challenge is to reformulating national security doctrine are great, in Canada, as in other countries, so are the potential payoffs. These include a wider scope of thinking about what constitutes national security threats, freed from the albatross weight of legacy concerns, a more cohesive whole lot of government approach, greater and more proportional linkages between the identified threats and response capabilities, renewed attention to the significance of early warning intelligence collection and risk assessment, and improved public understanding. The need for a new approach to national security embedded in a new national security strategy must, in our view, be one of the outcomes of the terrible experience of the current pandemic to ready us for the next. So basically, to sum it up, they're saying, I mean, usually national security strategy is about securing the nation state. And here, when you're including the dynamic of pandemic into this structure, into the strategy, into the national security strategy, it means you are looking outside the nation state. You are again, you need to make, you need to break down walls, and you need to have a collective security thing going on. And which means it's not just with allies, but with so many other actors across. And so herein, they're saying that you need to have a relook at the whole thing. So let us see how things move forward. Either nation states are going to have a new security formulations coming up, or as soon as the pandemic is over, are they just going back to being back to normal and just be sitting tight with their allies and forming their own collective security groupings as the EU or the NATO or things like that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm gonna throw something way out there, and
Mhm.
Peter Frank Hopen in his book on the Silk Roads really talks about how the East is rising again.
Mhm.
And I think that when we're talking about national security or all of these biological threats, climate change, the key takeaway is that Western thinking as a paradigm has its limitations. I mean,
Yes.
just listening to the language, everything is framed in dichotomy thinking, positive, negative, not this, just do this. They're not looking at how things connect, which is very much part of Eastern thought. It's looking at the relationship between different aspects of society, different conversations, how are things in nature interacting, right down to how we view medicine. A major problem in the pandemic situation is that people are only approaching Western medicine to save their lives. And it's far more complex. Greater public health depends very much on nutrition, physical activity, genetics. Also, we know from Eastern medicine that there are certain things, herbal formulas that help the body to resist infection from all respiratory illnesses, including COVID. And those have had almost no attention in this Western attitude of break it down and only look at this one piece, and only that ventilator is going to save your life. And only Anglo-Saxons can talk about biological security. I mean, that's ridiculous. One of the key lessons of the pandemic is that we should be learning how people of different backgrounds talk to each other within their country, how different countries are talking to each other about this, and how are we explaining the connections between all of these things. Because we live in a world where it matters what people in China are eating. And are they going into bat caves in Wuhan to sell those things in a market? All of those little details matter for the rest of us. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, so I would hope
So you're
that,
muted.
yeah. And maybe it's time for a systems-based political theory.
I think you should work on it, Laura.
I mean, it's already out there in a lot of different sectors. Botanists are really talking about it. Anyone dealing with biology, botany, they're really showing how systems are the primary foundation of healthy ecosystems. We're starting to talk about how systems are applying to both politics and economics, but it's still kind of a fringe conversation.
Right. It should become mainstream, and maybe it will be, like how radical politics or extremist politics used to be fringe studies just like maybe 10 years ago. Now they become mainstream.
I mean, we know what happens with this all or nothing dichotomy based thinking. It leads us right into global conflict and hundreds of millions of people dying.
Yeah.
I have one question for you. Again, since we started on the note of nation state, The emergence of the nation state, I think, more or less I think removed Christianity from the picture. Also Islam. Well, they exist, but they're not. You know, they're broken into nation states now. So it's not. They're not. Islam is not a global religion. No, it is a, you know, a group of nation states. So a group of nation states is not Islam anymore. So in the same way, I would say the same thing for Christianity too. And they're not for. I didn't get the right word. The emergence of nation states, Christianity ceased to be a force. As such, Islam too. I think both these two things, both these two theologies cease to be a force. Because now they engage with each other in terms of nation states. Now, again, with the nation state, this is the idea of nation state under threat. How would you think? What would be the next change? What would fall next, or what would you see emerging out of this?
Okay. Well, I think that for a long time, the nation state built its legitimacy on the fact that it was the best available option. And if we think about, what was it, the pyramid of needs, you know, physical security, then creature comforts, you know, what are people most willing to support in terms of their own kind of personal security and happiness? I can't remember the name of this. You know what I'm talking about though, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the psychologist pyramid of what a person has to have.
Right. Yeah.
Until they can develop as a person. Well, it's the same thing with countries, because of course they're inherently based on people's behavior. So the nation state, there was no way that Rome as a church with no military could ensure people's safety, physically speaking, in villages all over Europe. And the same thing for the Ottomans all throughout their empire. No religion can ensure safety because it requires that everybody adhere to the ideas of that religion. So when the nation state model evolved, the new religion was really capitalism, commerce, money. Money will make people feel secure.
Yes.
They can, you know, they have to be, and the more interconnected we are economically, the more secure we'll become. But right now we're hitting the walls of that way of looking at the world too, because corporations are so much in control of everything. So instead of hearing from people and people creating those connections, we have kind of this counterproductive behavior where, you know, they will protect the corporation over their own neighbor.
So you're going to see something like a corporate state coming out of, or how Philip Bobbitt said the market state, how the evolution of market state.
Yes, I mean, we're already witnessing this battle between nation state and market state,
Right.
and we're not really sure which one is winning.
Mm-hmm.
So I dare say, I don't know what's next, but I think that what we're going to need is more resilient representation in terms of political strategy. So, because any system of government needs different voices and different things for different problems. And half of the battle is knowing who to talk to when based on what kind of threat you're dealing with. So when we're talking about COVID-19 and pandemics, why are we still talking to national security advisors? They should not be the primary voice of policy.
Exactly. And right.
Epidemiologists, the cultural experts who really understand what are people doing on the ground that are spreading this disease. People got so mad at me in America because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was saying, we don't stand a chance. I mean, Americans are filthy. They are absolutely filthy. You cannot access hot water and soap in most public places. They don't even have the buildings hooked up to hot water heaters. The toilets are filthy. You see people going to the bathroom and touching their children's faces and then eating with unwashed hands. I mean, we track our shoes through public places and then track them in through our houses. I mean, we did not stand a chance. So blaming all of our problems on China, it's kind of cheap. Instead of just cleaning up our act, cleaning your hands, wash your face, stuff like that, make hot water and soap available.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to be bothered with it, or wear a mask and stay out of people's faces.
Right.
They still don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's again, we need resilient governments.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
the whole point of political theory is that you can take bits and pieces of different political theories and apply them in real world situations so that they'll work. So if we're only using realism and liberalism theory, one is
Right.
totally focused on national security and the other one's totally focused on economic trade.
Yeah.
Well, what about the other stuff?
Exactly. You're right. And then they're turning the entire debate on these two things. And yeah. But
Exactly.
Where does this lead to?
I mean,
But
we're
let's see.
focused on guns
Uh-huh.
and we're focused on money.
Mhm.
And then you have the gun experts and the money experts talking about germs. Oh, that's not going to work.
Yes, exactly. They didn't know a thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't seen it yet. I think that I'm hoping there's going to be room for that kind of leadership that takes a more holistic approach to governance, because it is complex and we need people to kind of focus on those complexities and be more willing to open a dialogue about things rather than tell people what to do. I really see in the world, people are tired of being told what to do or working their whole lives for nothing.
Mhm.
To make
That's
the
the
rich
case.
richer.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what has been happening. And, well, to affect real change, there should be the public should want it. The public, it should come from the public. And I mean, unless somebody, completely takes over, or some corporations become enormously big or 10 times the size of Google or Amazon, and they decide to have a military structure, I don't think any government would survive if the public doesn't want it. The entire public really doesn't want it.
Yeah, and the same thing with corporations. I mean, the corporations are just as exclusive and anti-participation as the governments are.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
so God, Ernst & Young, which is a gigantic consulting firm here,
Yeah.
was brought up in the media for having, they had all kinds of requirements of how women should look, speak, dress, if you wanted to work in this company.
Mm.
And it was like pretty 1950s crazy.
Mhm.
It was so rigid that the 1950s were actually more empowering for women than what Ernst and Young were saying.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Basically, well, you can work here if you want to play by our rules, and if not, too bad, don't work here.
Right.
And that's kind of the liability with the market state, is that culturally speaking, they're just as exclusive. And people's entire economic ability and self-determination is hinged on whether or not they can fit into that kind of culture, corporate culture. And
Mhm.
so anyone who is just kind of inherently a free thinker or a revolutionary or just doesn't fit the mold, they have a
I mean, like
very hard time.
basically people like us. Basically people like
Yeah.
us.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, I was rejected from 12 PhD programs in North America when our professors in France were saying, you've got to stay in France. They love you. They want you to keep writing about this subject.
Yeah.
And I was like, great. How do I do it in French? And how do I pay for it? And
Mhm.
we couldn't really, at that time, Sarkozy had come to power. So it was increasingly harder. And I had to make the decision to leave or come back to the United States or whatever. But it's, yeah, it's no secret why free thinkers are pushed out of corporate society.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, again, it is consumerism, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this whole dialogue about the attention economy, I mean, that's something we hear a lot more on the radio. It's invasive. I mean, you're getting text messages and emails trying to
Very
have
much.
people get your attention on this. Look at who's wearing what on Instagram.
Exactly. I just realized that after you said this, I feel so annoyed to delete the text messages on my phone. It's like I feel so annoyed because they, they fill up your space and you don't know where the important message, got stuck, and you need to go through all these messages because you want to delete them so that when an important text message comes, you need to be ready for it.
It's crazy. I mean, even here in New Orleans, this is really kind of historically the center of American counterculture. This is where it all started. Nobody likes the British. They don't dance, they don't sing, they're so white. New Orleans is covered in colors and different types of music and people from all over the world, and everything is individualized to the point of like the settling families would have different slaves from different parts of Africa doing the wrought iron on their balconies just to show their individuality and incorporating things about their journeys, their names, their struggles, whatever their story was. It's all literally woven into the architecture of this city. And yet you have people coming here and all they want to do is consume. They don't know how to sit in the square and listen to music and do nothing. You have all of these things that are just fuel for the imagination and prompting people to think about their own story and who they are, and it's largely ignored.
Yeah, and also it's all about the blues and supposedly the home of the blues, right?
Yeah, and jazz started here, but I was reading that there were different slaves brought in or that came in from the Caribbean, like the Haitian slaves that rose up against Spain, actually came to New Orleans and settled. So there were many different types of slaves. You can see on the main church that there's voodoo symbols from the African religions.
Wow.
Everywhere in the ironwork, like literally written on the buildings of the church, there's symbols from African religions, and they would always dance in celebration on their Sabbath day, Sunday. And for the French and Spanish, that was fine. They didn't have any problem with music or dancing or people in the streets doing those things.
Yeah.
The women could own businesses. There were all kinds of things in those cultures that the British, when they gained control of this place, they hated all of it. They hated the dancing, they hated the music.
Yeah.
And they were coping mechanisms. I mean, they came from somebody's culture in Africa, but you know, imagine, did they try to take dancing away from Indians in India?
But what they did is they have actually taken up the handicrafts, the handicraft industry from the Indians, native Indians here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff is gone.
It's, well, luckily they haven't succeeded, but a lot of people are looking at corporations as that new kind of colonial attitude.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we could be looking at a neo-colonial system or culture driven by the corporates. I think that is actually happening right now. And I think, as you rightly said, it is a battle between them and the nation state. And so they need the consumers for it. And but at some point you have a lot of the people running the nation state are also, you know, hand in glove, totally in hand in glove with this corporate culture thing. So I really am racking my brain here how this is all going to, you know, how it all is going to emerge. I kind of feel that at some point, I don't know if with this battle of the nation state going on, I think there's going to be a group of super wealthy individuals coming up, corporations, individuals, I would say. I mean, far more wealthier than what we have now. Far more wealthier than Bezos, or, you know, probably, you know, 10 times or 50 times more wealthier. And at that time, at that point, and I think it's going to happen soon. I think we may see that happen in our own lifetime. We may not have to wait for 200 or 300 years, but it's going to happen within our own lifetimes. And so I think we're all in uncharted territory here. I mean, we can. So what's going to happen then? They're not going to give up their wealth or power, because the nation state itself, again, in a way, protects their wealth. But only the nation state can do it. It gives security to these wealthy individuals and corporations. So
yeah. And I think there's also very much alternative paradigms that are rising up. So in no conversation has there been anything about feminism or ecologic. Is there an ism for ecology? What's the ism?
I think it's just ecology.
But we kind of have this backlash of counterculture, alternative thinking, the feministic movement saying, well, neither of those systems are going to work because you're not talking to everybody. So it's, again, participation and conversation and looking at the relationship between things, the systems thinking. And that is much more,
Can you
the
hear me?
system,
I think I lost both of you.
is it working?
No, you are visible.
Okay. Well, the systems thinking is much more congruent with the foundations of both Eastern thought, with feminist thought, and with how scientists and biologists are going to look at the world. So hopefully the systems thinkers will be able to give everybody a run for the money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Your screen, both of your screens frozen up. I think I'm getting hungry now. It's way past my dinner time. Laura, I forgot to ask you, did you have your breakfast or you just sat in the meeting?
No, I had something. Thank you.
All right. Sorry.
It was good to see you both.
Yeah, what is the time now? Yeah, oh, yeah, 10:14. Okay.
Yeah, it's getting late. Well, if you have another article that we want to discuss in the future, please let me know. Or
Yeah, we will.
let
We
me
will.
know.
Yeah.
We will
Okay.
be doing this quite often, Laura. It was really very, 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 very enlightening and educate you too. Anyway,
Yes, for me
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Thank you for the book recommendation. I'm gonna try and find that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you
All
guys
right.
have a good night.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And you have a great day in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And if you find a nice jazz band, yes, enjoy. Have a drink
Yes.
on me. Have a drink on both of us while
Thank
enjoying
you.
the jazz.
I'll send you pictures from the banks of the Mississippi.
All right. Please do. Please do.
All right. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
All
Bye.
right.
Good day.
Bye.
Good day, Laura. Good day.
Bye. So I'll talk to you later too both. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, sir. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, James. Good night.